The way to win big pots in live cash games and have a huge edge is to master 3-bet pots. In this video, I'm going to give you 2 tips to increasing your edge in these large pots that will increase your win rate substantially. There are 2 keys to pre-flop 3-betting: hand selection and 3-bet sizes. If you only 3-bet with the absolute best hands, like pocket jacks and better and ace king and better, you're going to be super easy to play against. So, because of this, you're going to want to balance out your 3-betting range by adding in some bluffs. When thinking about adding bluffs into your range, it's important to figure out which hands to bluff with. And when you're playing with very deep stacks, as you very often will be in No Limit Hold'em cash games, you want to make sure whatever 3-bet bluffs you use have good post-flop playability. For example, you could 3-bet bluff with a hand like King 6 offsuit or 7-2 suited, but those hands are very, very unlikely to make a good, strong post-flop hand when you do happen to get lucky. So when you're 3-bet bluffing in cash games, you want to use hands that have good post-flop playability, like 8-7 suited, or Ace-5 suited, or Queen-9 suited. Essentially hands that can make straights and flushes, because those are the hands that you can actually play a gigantic pot with when you are fortunate enough to get a lucky flop. When you are likely to play the hand in position, you can 3-bet with a much more polarized range, opting to just call with hands that don't want to get 4-bet. For example, if someone raises and you have a hand like King Queen offsuit, you would much prefer to call in position because you really do not want to get 4-bet and have to fold that decently playable hand. But when you are out of position, such as when you're in the small blind or the big blind and you want to 3-bet, usually then you want to be 3-betting with a much stronger linear range of a lot of your very playable hands, because winning the pot before the flop with any hand from out of position is a fine result. Typically when you are 3-betting from in position, you're going to usually want to 3-bet to about 3.2 times your opponent's initial raise. So if you're playing $1, $2 no limit and they raise to, let's say, $7, if you want to 3-bet in position, you'll make it something like $22. But when you're out of position, you're going to want to make it more like 4 times your opponent's initial raise. So if they make it $7, you'll make it more like $28 from out of position. So now that we have pre-flop strategy down, let's take a look at 2 examples to illustrate these points. Let's take a look at this hand from 2-5 No Limit Hold'em, where the hijack raises it up playing $500 deep, and we are on the button with King 9 of spades. This is a hand that you certainly could call with, and if the hand was a little bit better, let's say it was a hand like King Jack of spades, you may actually want to call it. But because this is a hand that you can 3-bet and then somewhat confidently fold to a 4-bet, that makes it a very good 3-bet bluffing candidate. So we raise to about 3.2 times the initial raise to $50, and the initial raiser calls. Flop comes Queen 6-2, 1 spade, 2 clubs, the opponent checks. This is a situation where you're going to want to bet very frequently using a small size. A lot of players make the blunder of betting frequently, which is fine, but they always bet big because they're trying to get their opponent to fold. You have to realize if you bet $100 into the $100 pot and your opponent does not fold, you're usually in terrible shape. When you bet small, what's going to happen is your opponent's going to fold sometimes, which is great, but they're also going to call with a lot of marginal hands that you can then bluff on a later betting round. So we bet $27 in this scenario, about 25% pot, and the opponent calls. And again, they're going to call decently wide. Now, when your opponent checks on the turn, you're going to want to continue betting with your best made hands, in this scenario on Queen 6-2 turn Jack, probably with stuff like King, Queen, and better. And then you also want to be betting with draws that are going to be able to improve very frequently on the river, such as our straight flush draw when the Jack of spades comes, but also some junky draws, like perhaps King 9 offsuit in this spot, which is actually drawing kind of thin. And what's going to happen is that when we bet the turn, using a very polarized range of our best hands and some draws, our opponent does not know if we have a really good made hand we're happy putting a lot of money in with, or a draw that hopes the opponent will fold. So in this spot, the opponent checks, and we go for about a 2/3 pot bet of $100 into the $161 pot. And you're going to find that in this spot, most of your opponents are going to fold unless they have a queen. And if they do have a queen, a lot of them will not shove it all in, which will allow you to see if you improve on the river and then bluff if you feel inclined. This time though, we bet 100, the opponent just folds, and we win a nice pot. Let's take a look at another example, this time from out of position. It folds around to the button playing $1, $3, no limit hold'em, who raises it up to $10. We are in the small blind with Jack 9 of spades. This is a hand that a lot of people call with to try to flop well, but this is a spot where you're going to want to 3-bet almost every hand in your range, especially in live cash games, where if you call, a decent rake is taken out of the pot. When you 3-bet, sometimes your opponent folds and you win the entire pot immediately without having to see the flop, without having to pay a rake, and that's fantastic. So we're going to 3-bet to $40. Remember, 4 times the initial raise. They made it 10, 4 times 10 is 40. The opponent calls, flop comes, Jack 10, 5. This is a spot where we're gonna, again, want to continuation bet decently often and probably using a small size. So we go $20 into the $83 pot with our top pair marginal kicker, and the opponent calls. And again, they're gonna call pretty wide when you bet small, especially when they're in position. And if they do happen to drastically overfold to your small bets here, you're gonna print money with all your hands that don't connect with the flop. So we bet small, the opponent calls, turn is the 2 of spades. This is a spot where, again, you're gonna want to bet with many of your best made hands and some draws. So is Jack 9 one of your best made hands on Jack 10, 5, 2? And it's close. I think this is a hand that you certainly could bet, but I think checking is quite nice. And you're gonna find, especially from a game theory optimal point of view, you're gonna want to check with some top pairs, and those are usually gonna be your top pairs with the weakest kicker. Because if you keep betting the turn and then betting the river, you're trying to get called by middle pair, and a lot of players will not call it off with middle pair for a turn plus a river bet. So instead, check and give your opponent every opportunity to either bluff or overvalue a worse made hand. So we check, the opponent now bets $50. When you check the top pair, again, from a game theory optimal point of view, you are not looking to fold it unless the board runs out especially poorly for you. So the plan here is to check call the turn, and then check call on pretty much every safe river. The only really bad rivers in this scenario would be an ace, a king, or a queen, because the opponent will have a whole lot of random overcards in their range, or perhaps that would hit a kicker if they had a hand like king 10 and a king comes. So river's a 6, which is an excellent card. We're gonna check the river and call whatever the opponent bets. We check, they rip it all in for a little bit less than pot, and I realize in this scenario it feels kind of rough calling it off with the top pair because obviously we could be beat, but at the same time there are a lot of busted draws and also perhaps even some thin value bets that may be getting super greedy, so we have a very, very easy call in this spot. We call, the opponent shows the king queen for a very reasonable bluff, and we win a nice pot. Do me a quick favor and click the like and subscribe buttons down below. That helps out the channel. We could use your help. Good luck in your games, have fun. I hope you 3-bet a lot more and put your opponents in rough spots, and if you do that over and over again, the money's gonna flow your direction.